One of the key aspects that I saw was the lack of a so-called opposition, the lack of what often is required for the US and Israel to get their way with regime change, which is a force either within the country or externally coming into the country, as we saw in Syria. I didn't see any of that. Your thoughts?
During the funeral, the last vehicle that was carrying bodies was for the children, and including the entire family of one of the nuclear scientists. In fact, one of the nuclear scientists, which was murdered, his extended family was slaughtered because he took refuge in his father's house in a small city, and the Israeli regime destroyed the entire building, slaughtering many of their close relatives along with the family itself. And so people in Iran, when they see this sort of behavior and they see these sort of crimes committed and they see how Western media justifies it, not just Fox News, but CNN, not just Breitbart, but the New York Times, not just the Times, but the Guardian or France 24, they're all the same and people recognize it. Or the huge number of Persian media based in the West with Persian speaking mercenaries spouting propaganda, Western propaganda, justifying the crimes of the Israeli regime and trying to demoralize the Iranians. They see this huge apparatus and the injustice, and they see the dead bodies and the dead children too. And so that created unity among the population. But more importantly, Danny, more importantly, is the fact that it created a new awareness among many young Iranians who had never seen the revolution, who had never seen the United States support the Shah when he gunned down people on the streets, who did not see how the United States and the Europeans and the Germans in particular, who Professor Kadkohdaee was alluding to, I think, the remark made by the German chancellor who said the Israeli regime is doing our dirty work for us. It's the same German regime that was giving Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to use against Iranians and his own people. And back then, they fully supported it. So these young people did not see that. They did not grow up during those years, the 1970s or the 1960s or the 1980s. And of course, these young people have been, many of them, influenced by Western narratives, by the Persian media that promotes the empire. And of course, many of them grew hostile, many of them grew critical, many of them grew indifferent to the Islamic Republic of Iran and believe that we are being stubborn and that the West wants to solve all the problems and that we are being stubborn. And if we just put our stubbornness aside, things will become much better. And if we put aside resistance, then the West will no longer antagonize us. That belief has been completely demolished. And many people have contacted me over the past 16, 17 days since the start of the war. And they've told from both inside Iran and outside of Iran, Iranians who live abroad have been telling me that my views are completely different now. I've recognized that I was wrong and that actually Ayatollah Khamenei was right in being in not trusting the West, in being cautious about the West, in being skeptical about the West. The very fact that the United States was negotiating with Iran and the US president was pretending to be against an attack, yet it turns out that he was plotting against the people of Iran. And the very fact that his own opponents among elites in the West who hate Trump and who oppose him on every issue, when it comes to attacking Iran, all of them are on the same side. All of them whitewash the Zionist regime. All of them try to glorify the actions of the regime. That has had a huge impact in Iran. And it has united Iranians in a way which I have not seen for the last 35 years. It is like when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. And so it wasn't just hearing the funeral, it was also in funerals that were held across the country where people went to the streets in huge numbers. But it wasn't only during the funerals, it was last Friday during the airstrikes, during the barbaric attacks when they were targeting hospitals, when the Zionist regime was targeting the ambulances, family cars. They bombed family cars on highways. When they targeted the Red Crescent Society, just one of the people that was injured, one of the Red Crescent workers, one of them who was severely injured, just died hours ago. The news came out. So this regime, the Israeli regime, they were bombing people across the board and slaughtering them. Yet people went to the streets across the country to rally in support of the government, the armed forces, the state institutions. And interestingly, on the first day when the Israeli regime attacked and slaughtered so many people and murdered so many senior commanders, that night, many people went to the streets. But another thing that I should add, which goes back to what I said early on, is that in the West, they claimed that Iran is a repressive regime, that people have no freedom, that it is unpopular. Well, this barbaric Zionist regime took out the leadership of the Revolutionary Guards. What happened? Did the people turn against the system? Did they celebrate the murder of the guards? Did they find this as an opportunity to revolt? Because the guards at that moment they were leaderless. Most of the leaders were gone. Wow. But nothing happened. It was the exact opposite. The exact opposite. And that shows that, in fact, the Islamic Republic of Iran has always had popular support. And today its popular support is much greater than ever before. And the fact that the armed forces, the army, the navy, the air force, the guards, and the state together combined was able to repel this collective attack on the nation, this collective act of war and aggression, with the help of neighboring countries. The role of the dictatorship in the Republic of Azerbaijan is still unclear to us. The fact that radar stations in countries that neighbor us were all being used, the airspace of Jordan and Iraq were all being used. The fact that NATO countries have been, not only were they helping, but as we speak, we are seeing Western European and North American countries immediately sending plane loads full of weapons to Israel to prepare it for another round of aggression against the Iranian people. We're seeing that. Of course, the Iranians are preparing themselves. And this time round, if anything happens, the punishment for the Israeli regime will be different from before. And my advice to Zionists is to leave Palestine now. They have no future there. Those who have carried out crimes against humanity, who have slaughtered Palestinians in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip in particular, they should leave now. But in any case, the point is that all of the narratives of the West with regards to Iran have been proven to be false. And whenever in the past we would say that your narratives are false in the Western media, they would laugh at us, they would ridicule us, they'd insult us, they'd call me a mouthpiece of the regime, the likes of Piers Morgan and others who people talk about his hostility towards me and his hatred for Iran and his constant abuse towards Iran. Even though all of that abuse, not just by him, but by all of these mainstream Western media outlets, all of them do this in order to legitimize aggression. They create hatred for a people to prepare the grounds for war, to make ordinary people in the West support war. And then they lie about, Fox News is now telling people about threat inside the United States. They arrest 4 Iranians who went to the United States to immigrate. They speak about sleeper cells, all lies, including CNN speaking about sleeper cells, these liberals. They do it to demonize ordinary Iranians in the United States, but also to create hatred for Iran, to legitimize airstrikes, to legitimize murder, to legitimize the slaughter of entire families and people living in apartment blocks. That is what this is all about. But people today see through it. And so these Western media narratives, all of them have been crushed. They've been broken. People see what's going on the streets in Iran. People see what's going on now in the UK. We see in how the slogans against the Israeli regime are being repeated by huge crowds. Huge crowds are chanting against this murderous Zionist regime, and this BBC tries to censor it. And the regime in London tries to create fear by saying that they're going to carry out an inquiry. In other words, what they want to create fear in order to silence people who support the Palestinian people and who oppose the Holocaust. So it's extraordinary how the tables have turned. Until now, the narrative has been that the Iranian people are against the so-called regime, where it turns out that the British people are against the regime.
There are reports that Israel now that they are seeking something, an incredible amount of money worth 17 billion, I think, U.S. dollars worth of air defense replenishments following this 12-day war, as the West is calling it. In large part because the U.S. has admitted itself that it depleted about 20+% of its entire THAAD air defense systems, giving them to Israel in order to defend against Iranian missiles. There's big fights about this, and I'm curious on your reaction to the state of Israel, not the state of Israel, but the status of Israel after this, because on the one hand, they're claiming and they're saying that they want to go back at it as soon as possible. On the other, I'm curious on your assessment of how Iran actually did, because there's a lot of people who have doubted Iran's response, and I'm curious your reaction to this.
Well, I think Trump himself stated that Israel was hit really hard, and he didn't have to say that. I mean, he could have just not said it, but the reason was that it was something undeniable. And as I said, the reason why the war ended after 12 days, it didn't end. I mean, there was just a kind of a ceasefire, was because Israel could not take it anymore. But I think the most important point here is that, or the more important point here is that there's always been this discussion of whether Israel is a liability or an asset for the Americans. And there's been, well, we know there's a kind of a hegemonic pro-Israel kind of discourse in the United States, which is made possible by the Israel lobby, which by lobby we do not mean AIPAC, we mean a very kind of a big network of different organizations, different individuals, trying in different ways to determine the discourse about Israel. But in recent years, recent decades, especially after the publication of the Israel lobby by Mersheimer and Walt, there's this discussion of how beneficial this relationship is for the Americans. This started, but I think now with this confrontation with Iran, where Israel finally gets to fight a real country, a real army, because before that, all it was doing was that it was attacking women and children, defenseless people, even when it was in Lebanon, because Lebanon was, apart from Hezbollah, which is a kind of an organization. It's not the Lebanese government. It is part of the government, but it's the Lebanese government has never properly fighted the Israelis. The same with the situation in recent years with Syria. So in the case of Iran, maybe it was the first time that in recent decades that Israel was actually fighting an enemy that is able to fight back. So this discussion has, I think, become more serious, and I think this would be interesting to follow in future weeks and in future months. This argument in the United States about whether really how longer could this go? People starting to really critically question the relationship, whether it's worth it or not. There was a tweet, I think, by Trump stating that, we spend a lot on Israel. So, in a way, implying that because we spend a lot, so we have to, we get to say about what happens internally, about the problems that Netanyahu has in court. And in a way, Trump may be trying to instruct the Israelis to stop that, the course of the court, which is being carried out against Netanyahu. So I think, and that was serious. That was, the Israelis were upset about that. Why is he interfering in our internal issues? Well, he's paying a lot of money to you. So I think the whole logic of this relationship, this so-called relationship, is, I think it's been questioned in a very serious way. And I think this is something that we should follow in the coming weeks and months. I think the relationship is not going to be as smooth as it was, because more and more people are thinking critically about it, not just the atrocities that are happening in Gaza, in which the US is the main enabler and it's complicit in those atrocities, but also about how much should we spend on a regime that's not able to defend itself when it comes to real armies. It's only able to slaughter women and children. So I think that's a very important issue related to what you mentioned.
Yeah, Dr. Marandi, in many ways, how I see this is that to follow up what Dr. Kadkohdaee was saying, is that while it's hard to imagine the United States breaking from Israel, given just how deeply, when it comes to the U.S. regime, how deeply tied and bound it has made itself to Israel, it has become. But at the same time, what Israel ended up doing put the United States in a very precarious position. And those 12 days, they ended up being just 12 days in large part because the U.S. couldn't go on without potentially catastrophic consequences. What are your reactions to this?
If, as Professor Kadkohdaee said, if the Israeli regime had won, if they were winning, or if there was just a stalemate, the war would have continued. Why not? Why wouldn't it continue? But the fact was that the Israeli regime was losing, despite this blitzkrieg attack against the Iranians, despite the fact that the Americans and the Europeans gave it everything they had, everything, things that, as I said, Zelensky could only dream of. All of them were at the disposal of the Israeli regime. Not just the equipment, but the US troops themselves, US air defenses, the Europeans, regional actors, all having US assets on their territory to be used against the Iranians. Every single one. So, despite all that, they had to end it swiftly. Remember in the beginning hours how Trump was gloating and how he was ridiculing Iran because he thought that the regime was winning. Because he has no understanding, nor does his people, nor do American elites, nor do these so-called Iran experts in U.S. think tanks. None of them have any idea about the reality in Iran. They all misread Iran because they've been busy producing propaganda for decades. These so-called think tankers produce all sorts of material about Iran, all nonsense. Whether it's the Atlantic, the New York Times, or the think tanks themselves, they all produce nonsense and propaganda like the propaganda of the Soviet Union, only a bit more shiny and a bit more well written and a bit more sophisticated than the crude propaganda of old. So they fund their so-called Iran experts to say what needs to be said. And then those Iran experts invite politicians and give them huge honorariums to come and say what needs to be said so that they can get more funding to pay to themselves and the politicians. And everyone is benefiting off of this circle and these relationships, except for the American people who are paying for it. That when the time comes and policies are implemented, we see that the exact opposite of what all of them were predicting turns out to be the case. And yet, since there's no accountability in the United States whatsoever, no one goes back 10 years to see what these people said about Iran and what actually happened. No one goes back 3 years ago to see what they were saying about Iran and what actually happened. No one looks and sees what they were saying 15 years ago and their predictions about the future of Iran, whether they were right or wrong. No one does that. They continue to speak nonsense. They continue to get it wrong. The United States continues to misread the situation. They implement, and the Europeans, and this Zionist regime, and they continue to implement policies that hurt themselves more than anyone else. Because when you implement a policy based on ignorance, you're going to get hurt. And the Israeli regime has turned out to be a huge liability for the West. It is no asset whatsoever. The West's image has been demolished, completely demolished, because of Gaza, because of the genocidal attacks in Lebanon, because of the war they waged against Yemen, and because of the unprovoked war against Iran, and because of the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, and because the Israeli regime is now universally acknowledged as an apartheid ethno-supremacist regime. People across the world have woken up. People in the West have woken up. You see major actors in the United States like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, even Bannon in his own way. Even Bannon in his own way. Not that he's someone who I admire in any way or form, but even Bannon in his own way.
Right.
Look at how they're, and of course, across the board, you see how people are changing, and even attitudes towards Iran. Because in the left, in the West, not in the global South, in the global South, the left has always had a good relationship with Iran, an excellent relationship with Iran in many cases. But in the West, the left has always been irrationally hostile towards Iran. And there are many reasons for that, and I don't want to go into it. Maybe one day we can discuss that in detail. But we see the left is changing their attitudes, thanks to a lot of very decent people. But also among the right, attitudes are changing towards Iran. And the left and the right, their attitudes are changing towards the Israeli regime and towards Western regimes as well. And that divide that has been created in the West in order to keep people separate, in order to keep them all in small pockets and separate from each other so that the regime could rule more easily, that divide is falling apart. And people across the board, left, right, center, wherever they are on the political map, they're recognizing what's happening. They're recognizing how Western media, whether it's state media like the BBC, or whether it's so-called private media like CNN, whether it's the left, the so-called left like MSNBC, or in reality, the liberals, or it's the right like Fox News, and the same is true across Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, Canada. They're all the same. They all belong to the same political regime. They do not reflect the views of the people. They hide genocide. They hide a Holocaust. If you say death to the IDF at a concert, to the IDF, not to even Zionists, just the IDF as a institute of slaughter, like the German army in the Second World War. If you say that, the police will come after you. You will be censored. There will be an inquiry. All the political regime and the political parties affiliated to the regime will universally condemn you. They'll make you feel threatened. All of this is causing people to wake up even further. It's having the opposite effect of what they intended. The more they expose themselves, the more people will recognize that this whole notion of the civilized world and the free world was all a facade. And not just in the West, but across the world. People across the world are witnessing what's happening in the UK. They're witnessing what's happening in the United States. They're witnessing what's happening in Gaza and Iran. They're witnessing how Western regimes and the International Atomic Energy Agency are effectively endorsing airstrikes on civilian nuclear sites, which could kill, hypothetically, through contamination, people across the region and in cities nearby. That is how sinister they are. People see that across the world. So things have changed and they're not going to go back. So, in all of this, not all of this, a lot of this is because of the Israeli regime. Empire is sinister. There's no doubt about it. The role that they play in Africa and Latin America and across Asia, Southeast Asia, wherever you look, the role has never been benign. It has always been sinister. But what they've done in Gaza and the Holocaust in Gaza that's being carried out in front of our eyes for almost 2 years now, day and night. And then simultaneously, we see how the Western media looks away or tries to justify it. And Western states clamp down on people who protest and makes them pay a price. All of that means that the Zionist project is a liability. It is a burden to the empire, especially to an empire that is collapsing fast and which is reached the end of the road.